Hey guys, welcome back to Coach Hall Writes. In today's video, we're going to be going over 5 tips to help you improve your synthesis essay. When you encounter a synthesis prompt on the AP exam, they're going to give you a paragraph of context, and then they're going to give you the prompt later on. Now, the prompt is not phrased like a question, it's more like a statement. So they're going to ask you to develop a position on, and then whatever comes next, that's what you're actually supposed to write about. So I chose a couple phrasings that I saw multiple times on AP Classroom. The first one is to develop your position on the role, if any, blank plays in the future. So there's a couple questions you could ask yourself. Should it stay the same? Should there be minor changes? Should there be major changes? Or do we need a complete overhaul? So to answer this question, you want to ask yourself, what is the role of that particular topic? And then why? The why is important because that's going to be your commentary. Now, for the other phrasing that I've seen used quite frequently, they ask you to develop a position on the most important changes or factors. Now, I'm not sure how they're going to phrase it on exam day. In fact, because there's 3 renditions of the test in 2021, and it's possible that there's going to be multiple versions of the test each time they offer it, one person might encounter one thing, somebody else might encounter something else. So that's why it's really important to understand what you're being asked to do. If you're being asked about important changes or factors, those are just different things that you need to consider. The way I like to approach this type of question is to identify at least 2 factors that I think are important. And I might ask myself, okay, which one's the most important and which one comes in second? That way I have a logical order. And then I also ask myself, okay, what change or factor is least important, because I might be able to use that for a concession and refutation later on. Those are not required. We're going to talk about them later in this video, but they can be helpful. Before you actually start writing your essay, it's usually very helpful to plan your main points. So you need to decide how many developed paragraphs you can reasonably write. So could you write 2 or could you write 3 paragraphs about this topic? Development is key, so quality over quantity. Then you need to ask yourself, what are the main points? So one of the problems that I see students have sometimes is that their main points are so specific and they're so centralized to one source that they struggle to really develop their ideas without just summarizing the source. So consider that as you're coming up with your main points. You don't want them to be too broad, but you don't want them to be so narrow that you run out of things to say. One way to help you determine your main points of your essay a little bit easier is to make sure that you're actually annotating or taking notes as you encounter the sources. So depending on whether you're taking the paper test or the digital test, this might look a little bit different. But in theory, if you have some sort of scratch paper or ability to take notes, go ahead and note the main idea or main ideas of each source. That way you can see which sources are about which topic, and that way you can decide how to put them into conversation with each other. Generally speaking, when it comes to my own students, I recommend that they try to include 2 sources in one paragraph. Now, this is a recommendation, not a rule, but the reason why I recommend 2 sources per paragraph is because, number 1, you need to cite 3 sources in your essay or more, but also because it's putting the sources into conversation with each other. So if you think about a conversation, the way a conversation works is that you've got multiple perspectives. You're not just summarizing what the other person says. You might summarize a little bit of it to clarify, but really you're going to agree with them, maybe disagree, maybe you're going to add in new information. Those are skills that keep the conversation going. So look for those relationships within the sources themselves. So sometimes a source might be about a really specific topic, and there might not be another source about that topic. But if you broaden it a little bit, maybe you can put the sources into conversation with each other. Or you might encounter 2 sources that have opposing views, and you can put those into conversation with each other. Or maybe they really are about the same topic, but they offer different causes, effects, solutions, things like that. So look for those moments of overlap where you can put them in conversation with each other, because that's going to be how you develop your argument instead of just relying on one source per paragraph. Regardless of what the topic is that you're being asked to develop a position on, there's going to be multiple perspectives. And this is actually helpful to you as a student, because if there are at least 2 different perspectives on an issue, that means that there's some tension there, and you can actually use this to develop your commentary. So one thing that you can do as you're examining the implications or the tensions within the sources themselves or within the issue itself is to try to situate it in a broader context. So depending on the issue, is there a historical perspective that you could look at? Is it related to current events? Do you have any personal experience with this topic? Is it possible that you could think about the future impact, either short-term or long-term impact on society? If you can answer any of these questions and go beyond what the sources say, this could help you develop your commentary and, depending on the execution, possibly even help you earn the sophistication point. Another way to improve your essay is to think about your transitions. So an essay needs to have a strong line of reasoning. There's a couple different things to consider. We already talked about trying to come up with the best order of your main points. We want them to progress in a logical order. We also want evidence that proves those main points. But you also want to focus on your transitions. Now, these occur within a paragraph and between paragraphs. In order to write a successful synthesis essay, you need to have a strong line of reasoning. A line of reasoning is a logical progression of ideas. Now, we've already partially addressed this when we talked about our main points, because you want to make sure that your main points are in a logical order. That way your paragraphs have a logical progression. You also want to select evidence that best proves those main points. Now, as far as transitions, this is another way to improve the flow of your essay. So you can have transitions within a paragraph and between paragraphs. So within a paragraph, usually it's between your layers of evidence and commentary. So you can use transition words that indicate the relationship between those layers. Words like similarly, conversely, additionally, therefore, furthermore, things like that. Those help signal to your reader that you're moving on, or it could signal, similarities, contrasts, things like that. Now, when you're actually navigating between paragraphs, you can use your topic sentences to help create a line of reasoning. One tip I have for you is to try to avoid really simple topic sentences, things like another factor to consider is, because even though this is transitioning, it's not exactly the most well-written way to do it. So another way that might be a little bit better could be something like, having already discussed X, we must also consider Y. Or in addition to X, society must also consider Y. So you could manipulate that sentence however you need to, but basically try to create a bridge between your paragraphs. You also want to transition into your evidence. You don't want to just drop a quote in your essay because that's actually very jarring for your reader. So one way to do this is to embed your quote. That means to put words before it so that it reads more smoothly. One way that students tend to try to embed their quote is to just say, according to source B. Now, this is not wrong. It does count as citing your source. However, it is a bit arbitrary, and here's why. The College Board is the one who labeled it as source B. That's not its original name. So what I prefer when I'm reading an essay is to actually see students acknowledge the real author or the real source. So you could say, according to, and then the person's name, the author's name, and give their credentials. So who are they? Because that helps us understand why the evidence matters. So if they are a leading expert in their field, we need to know that, because if you're going to quote them, it helps it make more sense. Also, you could just quote the source itself. So you could say something like, according to a 2017 article from Forbes magazine. So give us as much specific information as you can. That helps it read better, and as the person's reading your essay, it helps them understand why you've chosen that evidence. So it actually adds credibility to your own argument. Another way to embed evidence is to choose a short quote, often something that's not a complete sentence, and to embed it into a sentence of your own, and then include a parenthetical citation at the end of the sentence. So that would be parentheses and then source and whatever letter it is. Close your parentheses and put the period outside of the source. This is what you do for MLA or APA, so this also helps to cite it. Remember, the citation does go at the end of the sentence though, not immediately after the quote. So if there's words after the quote, make sure you put your citation at the end of the sentence. A final tip is to consider a concession and refutation or a counterclaim and rebuttal. There is a slight difference between the two, but basically, if possible, if it's going to help your argument, consider addressing and then refuting the counter argument. So the counter argument is actually the opposite side. So what would people who are against your position say about your position? What would they argue instead? I've done a separate video about concessions and refutations that goes into this concept in much more detail, so I would love it if you would check that out. However, a concession is when you acknowledge the merit of the other side. You concede. So you're acknowledging that the opposite side isn't all that bad. However, in order not to contradict yourself, you have to have a refutation. So after you acknowledge the merit of the other position, then you have to note the limitations of that argument, or what people who say that fail to consider. Now, as far as where does this go, it can technically go anywhere in your essay. I've seen more and more students include it as a third body paragraph, so really trying to develop that concession and refutation. Don't just have it be 2 sentences. Really dig into the tensions there. Now, do you have to have it as a third body paragraph? No. Some students don't have enough time to do that. So as you're planning out your argument, that might be a third body paragraph, because you might say, you know what, if I don't get to it, I don't get to it. Other students like to include it in their other body paragraphs. So there's not really a right or wrong answer, but make sure that it actually helps your argument. Don't just throw it in there because you are told to. It has to be effective. If you're looking for more tips to help you prepare for the APLing exam, don't forget to check out my other videos. Also, check out the description box below because I do have some resources for teachers and students. And if you're a TikTok user, go ahead and look me up on TikTok at Coach Hall Writes. I do tips videos on that platform as well. Best of luck for those taking the exam. Until next time, happy writing!